You got an album with AC/DC, Megadeth, Alice in Chains, Def Leppard, and Aerosmith, all brought together for one movie. It had the world's biggest action star, a concept that was pure genius, and a budget that could rival the GDP of a small country. So how did this soundtrack get attached to one of the most notorious box office disasters of the entire 90s? This is the story of a legendary soundtrack that got lost in the shadow of an $85 million film that dared to go head-to-head with Jurassic Park and got absolutely crushed. Because you guys requested it, this is the story of Last Action Hero soundtrack. Before we get started with today's video, if you guys want to support my channel, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and share my videos. I've been told by a lot of you that you find yourselves unsubscribed from my channel or don't see my new videos pop up, so make sure you turn all notifications on. So to really get the sheer magnitude of the train wreck that was Last Action Hero, you got to go back to The Promise. And back in 1993, The Promise didn't get any bigger than Arnold Schwarzenegger. This wasn't just any actor. This was a global superstar, a cinematic titan who had basically defined the action genre for a decade. He was the Terminator, Conan the Barbarian, the guy who beat the Predator, and he was coming off the world-conquering success of Terminator 2. Arnold wasn't just a movie star. He was arguably the most famous and bankable person on the entire planet. When he put his name on a project, it wasn't just a movie, it was an event. And the project he chose was on paper brilliant. Last Action Hero wasn't just another action movie. It was a movie about action movies, a meta, self-aware, fourth wall breaking satire of the very genre that Arnold himself had built. The premise was pure high concept genius. A movie-obsessed kid gets magically zapped into the fictional world of his favorite action hero, Jack Slater. It was a chance to deconstruct all the cliches, to poke fun at the one-liners, the endless ammo, the impossible physics of Hollywood blockbusters, all while still giving you some thrills. The film was even set to be directed by John McTiernan, the man who was behind two of the genre's holy texts, Predator and Die Hard. It was a perfect storm of talent, the king of action, directed by the master of action, in a movie that, well, celebrated action. Columbia Pictures saw dollar signs and they bet big. The budget ballooned to a staggering $85 million, an absolutely astronomical sum for the time. For context, that was more than the budget for Terminator 2. This wasn't just the summer tentpole. This was the studio's crown jewel, the movie that was supposed to own the summer of 1993, and to make sure it would dominate, they gave it a secret weapon, a sonic bazooka aimed right at the heart of pop culture, the soundtrack. This was like a two-pronged musical assault. On one side, you had the orchestral score from the legend himself, Michael Kamen. This was the guy who gave Die Hard and Lethal Weapon their iconic sounds. He was the master at blending that adrenaline-pumping action with real thematic heart. For Last Action Hero, his score was described as a dynamite thematic fusion of classic orchestra and driving rock riffs. A perfect musical mirror of what the film was trying to do. But it was the other side of the soundtrack that made all the headlines. Columbia Records assembled a murderer's row of early 90s rock, hip-hop, and metal royalty. And this wasn't just a collection of old songs sitting around. This was an album of mostly new exclusive tracks. The biggest track off the soundtrack was AC/DC's tune Big Gun, which was produced by Rick Rubin, giving the band their first #1 hit of their career on the mainstream rock tracks chart. The video even features Arnold Schwarzenegger himself in character. And the soundtrack also features Alice in Chains, who were then at the height of their grunge-fueled fame, as they contributed two songs, A Little Bitter and What the Hell Have I? These were the first two songs to feature new bassist Mike Inez. However, you might be surprised to learn that guitarist Jerry Cantrell wasn't happy with the end product. He recalled in the liner notes of the band's Music Bank box set, stating, "This and A Little Bitter were mixed by Andy Wallace because Toby Wright had a previous commitment, and they always bothered me because they were too tinny compared to our other stuff. What the Hell Have I was issued as a single from the soundtrack, and it ended up peaking at number 19 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. Megadeth, fresh off their Countdown to Extinction tour, delivered the ferocious Angry Again, a song written by leader Dave Mustaine while on the Countdown to Extinction tour. As the title suggests, he was upset with his bandmates, the label, as well as his management, and he was also fresh out of rehab at the time. He penned the lyrics when he was half asleep and listening to the melody of the Clash song Should I Stay or Should I Go? It was also issued as a single from the movie soundtrack, peaking at number 18 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. Def Leppard sent the team in charge of the movie soundtrack a set of unfinished demos from their retroactive album. It was composer Michael Kamen who chose the song Two Steps Behind, which saw him add an orchestral string arrangement. The song peaked at number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and it peaked at number 5 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. Queensryche's single Real World was also issued as a single from the soundtrack, with it peaking at number 3 on the mainstream rock tracks chart. Aerosmith's performance of Dream On at MTV's 10th anniversary special in 1991 has often been hailed as one of the band's strongest renditions of the song. Backed by an orchestra led by Michael Kamen, the arrangement made perfect sense later when the track was included on the Last Action Hero soundtrack. Meanwhile, Fishbone's contribution stood out for a different reason. Swim was the only track on the album already available elsewhere, having been released just weeks earlier on their funk metal record Give a Monkey a Brain and He'll Swear He's the Center of the Universe. The list went on and on. Anthrax, with new frontman John Bush, contributed the song Poison My Eyes, which didn't make their record at the time The Sound of White Noise. Cypress Hill was also included on the soundtrack, as well as the mysterious guitar god Buckethead. So this was the package: the biggest star in the world, a visionary director, a clever, can't-miss idea, and a soundtrack so powerful it could have been its own festival. It had everything except an audience. Behind the curtain of Hollywood magic, the perfect blockbuster was already starting to fracture under its own immense weight. The production of Last Action Hero was a total disaster, defined by a punishingly tight schedule and this creeping sense of an identity crisis. The problems really began with the script. The original idea was apparently a darker, more cynical R-rated parody. But as the budget grew and Arnold's star power demanded a movie for everyone, the studio got nervous. The push began for a more family-friendly, lighthearted adventure. And this led to a revolving doors of writers doing frantic rewrites, pulling the film in two different directions at once. It soon got caught in this creative tug-of-war. Was it a gritty, violent deconstruction for adults or a whimsical fantasy for kids? And that fundamental conflict was woven right into the film's DNA, creating the tonal confusion that would later kill its reception. The pressure cooker environment meant that the production was just a frantic race against the clock. The shooting and editing schedules were famously crunched. The film was being tinkered with, recut, and reshaped right up until its release. In fact, the timeline was so tight that after its premiere, the legendary critics Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert noted that the film fell 10 minutes too long, a comment that sources on the production later admitted was because they literally had no time left to trim it down. They had to just ship the product, finished or not. But all of this was happening in the shadow of a much bigger, more catastrophic mistake. It was a decision born of pure Hollywood hubris, a blunder that would go down in box office history. It was the studio's decision to ignore the giant elephant in the room, which was Jurassic Park. Today it seems completely insane, but back in late 92 and early 93, the executives at Columbia were overflowing with confidence. They had Arnold. They had the meta concept. They'd seen early footage and believed they had the undisputed champion of the summer. When they looked over at Universal's big summer movie, a dinosaur flick from Steven Spielberg, they basically scoffed at it. Their confidence, or maybe their arrogance, was supposedly fueled by the lukewarm reaction to Spielberg's last movie, Hook. They'd figured he'd maybe lost his magic touch, and that a movie about theme park dinosaurs couldn't possibly compete with the raw star power of Arnold Schwarzenegger. So they made a fateful choice. They didn't just schedule Last Action Hero for the same summer as Jurassic Park, they didn't even put it out a few weeks apart to give it some breathing room. In a stunning act of defiance, they slated its release for June 18th, 1993, exactly 1 week after Jurassic Park's debut. It was a declaration of war. They weren't just competing, they were actively picking a fight, confident that their action hero would obliterate the dinosaurs. They were in essence waving a red flag at a Tyrannosaurus Rex. The production might have been a chaotic mess, but the real public-facing disaster was still to come. The release of Last Action Hero wasn't just a box office disappointment, it was a public humiliation, an extinction-level event that played out in real time on the front pages of the Hollywood trades. It all started on June 11th, 1993. On that day, Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park didn't just open in theaters, it detonated in the cultural landscape. The movie was a revolution. It was more than a film, it was a landmark achievement in special effects, a masterclass in blockbuster filmmaking, and a genuine phenomenon that captured the entire world's imagination. It roared to life with a then record-breaking opening weekend of over $47 million in North America. The world was instantly gripped by dinosaur fever. The conversation wasn't about what movie to see that summer, it was about when you were going to see Jurassic Park for the second time. 1 week after Jurassic Park came out, Columbia Pictures bravely pushed out Last Action Hero. The marketing blitz was in full swing. That AC/DC video was on heavy rotation on MTV. Arnold was on every talk show. The opening weekend numbers came in and they were catastrophic. Last Action Hero, the $85 million behemoth starring the world's biggest movie star, scraped together a paltry $15.3 million. To put that in brutal perspective, Arnold's salary for the film was $15 million. The movie's entire opening weekend was barely enough to cover its star's paycheck. The contrast was just devastating. Spielberg's dinosaurs had eaten $47 million in their first 3 days, while Schwarzenegger's meta-hero had barely made a dent. And the bleeding didn't stop. The word of mouth was weak and the reviews were mixed, with a lot of critics echoing the same confusion. What is this movie supposed to be? Audiences who were used to a certain kind of movie from Arnold were just baffled by the satirical tone.
As I watched Last Action Hero, I thought of a line written by film critic Vincent Canby at least a decade ago, that with the homogenization of the American film industry, with escalating budgets and safe subjects, we were heading toward a time when, in a manner of speaking, there would be just one movie made in a year. And Last Action Hero could be that film. It has the #1 movie star doing his thing and also commenting on it at the same time. Ultimately, he seems like he wants to get onto new territory, and so do we. I enjoyed chunks of Last Action Hero, but culturally, I think it may be more significant than it is entertaining.
I was also disappointed in it, Gene, and also, like you, I was impressed by some of the stunt work, but then again, you can kind of manufacture stunts. The tricky part is to put them in a movie that is worth watching for 2 hours and keeps your interest. And here, I think one of the problems was this duality, because the suspense scenes, when you're supposed to be really wrapped up in them, are all undercut by the knowledge that it's the movie within the movie, and so something is going to happen in such a way that what you're seeing isn't really what is going to be the payoff. I don't know if I made that.
In its second weekend, the film's box office dropped by a staggering 47%. It fell to fourth place, not only still being crushed by Jurassic Park, but it was now trailing behind new rom-coms like Sleepless in Seattle, as well as the family film Dennis the Menace. The image was undeniable. The king of action had been dethroned by a T-Rex, Tom Hanks, and a comic strip kid. When the dust finally settled, the financial story was grim. The film ended its domestic run with just $50 million, a massive loss against its $85 million production budget, and that's even before you factor in marketing costs. While it did a little better overseas, bringing the worldwide total to about $137 million, it was a profound failure. For a blockbuster of this scale, making back just 1.6 times your production cost was an undeniable bomb. The invincible aura around Arnold Schwarzenegger had just been shattered. The surefire hit was a certified flop. So what happened? How did a movie that had everything going for it, including the star, the director, the concept, the music, end up as one of Hollywood's most infamous cautionary tales? Well, the failure of the movie wasn't because of one single thing, but a perfect storm of bad luck, bad decisions, and a fundamental misunderstanding of its own audience. But blaming it all on the T-Rex was too easy. The film had deep internal problems that competition only made worse. The most significant was its chaotic, muddled tone. This is something that even Arnold himself would later make. The film was trapped in this creative no man's land between a violent R-rated action satire and a PG-13 family adventure. It tried to do both, and by doing that, it didn't really fully satisfy either group. The meta-humor, which was its whole selling point, was arguably a decade ahead of its time. And in 1993, mainstream audiences just weren't used to that kind of self-referential, fourth-wall breaking comedy that would later become normal in movies like Scream and Deadpool. It was too weird, too inside baseball for a crowd that just wanted to see Arnold blow stuff up. And the tonal confusion bled directly into the marketing. The trailers and TV spots had no idea how to sell the film's cleverness, so they just focused on the explosions and the one-liners, selling it as another straightforward action flick. When audiences showed up expecting Terminator 3, they were met with this strangely thoughtful film about the nature of fiction. The marketing promised one thing and the movie delivered something else entirely, leading to a massive disconnect with the very audience they were trying to attract. And what about that legendary soundtrack? Well, it was the ultimate collateral damage. The album was released, Big Gun was a real rock radio hit, and the collection of songs was by any measure incredible, but it was forever tied to a sinking ship. The music became the anthem for the failure. Instead of being the soundtrack to the biggest movie of the summer, it became this curious artifact, a killer playlist attached to a famous flop. Despite everything being against it, the album was still pretty successful, going platinum. But history has a funny way of reevaluating Hollywood's biggest failures. As the sting of the box office humiliation faded, something interesting started to happen. Last Action Hero found a second life. On home video, on late night cable, a new generation of viewers discovered the film free from the crushing weight of its initial hype and massive shadow of Jurassic Park. And they saw something that 1993 audiences had missed, a film that was ambitious, clever, and wildly ahead of its time. The very things that were once seen as its biggest weaknesses, the meta-commentary, the genre blending, and the deconstruction of action tropes, were now celebrated as its greatest strengths. The film's satirical jabs at how absurd action movies are were finally understood not as confusion, but as the entire point. It became a cult classic, a beloved what-if story of a misunderstood masterpiece. The narrative shifted. Last Action Hero wasn't a bad movie. It was a brilliant movie released at the worst possible moment in cinematic history. Its failure became part of its charm, a badge of honor for a film that was maybe too smart for its own good. And as the film itself was being reappraised, that killer soundtrack was finally getting its due, untethered from the stench of failure. For music fans, its quality was never really in doubt. The rock compilation stands today as a perfect time capsule of the early 90s hard rock and metal, a playlist that's still in rotation for anyone who loves heavy guitar riffs and soaring vocals. That brings us to the end of today's video. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on the soundtrack as well as the film, and we'll see you again in Rock Roll True Stories. Take care.